Welcome to Leader You by Black River Performance Management, where we believe work should fuel the human spirit, not drain it. In this leadership podcast, we will dive into the lived experiences of people flourishing in today's workplace and beyond. Join us to hear real-life examples of experiences from our own lives and from the leaders we know and trust. Successful organizations are dependent on people being competent in their job. To prepare people to do the work, we must prepare them according to the skills, knowledge, and abilities required for the job, correctly and consistently. One of the services Black River offers is evaluating employee and candidate competencies. Our 25 competency assessment focuses on the soft skills, or what we like to call them, essential skills. Our competency assessment is used for more accurate hiring practices as well as for staff development. Every organization could use these competencies to ensure an individual's skills match the soft skills required by the job, to nurture the right talent, to improve productivity, and to develop dynamic leaders. For a sample of the 25 leadership competencies, definitions, and assessment, email us at info@blackriverpm.com. Thank you for listening to the Leader You podcast. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Ron Oltmanns. He is the founder of Leadskill, a leadership consulting firm that develops leaders and teams for business impact. Ron has more than 25 years' experience in consulting and education, much of that time coaching and training business people. In enterprise, small business, and startups in the U.S., Asia, he's gained deep perspective on what makes people successful and what gets in their way. Leadskill conducts workforce assessments, psychometric testing, and leadership development programs in multiple countries. They are a longtime partner of TTI Success Insights, a global assessment firm that has led the field with multiple patents and innovations for team and individual assessments. Their validated and well-researched tools are localized for workforces around the world. Ron was born in Venezuela and grew up in the U.S. He lived in Singapore and for 5 years and in Shanghai for 3 years. He and his wife live in Houston, Texas, and they have 2 grown sons. Thank you, Ron, for being on the podcast today. I'm super excited to go into some...
Thank you for having me, Angie. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah. So the reason I wanted to have you on the podcast today is because we've been getting to know each other a little bit more recently in about the last 6 months. We do a lot of the same types of work, and we help each other, and I think we really learn from one another. And what I wanted to do with you is different because usually on the podcast we're talking about one leadership competency, something that I see somebody being really good at, and something that they feel that they're very good at too. And so we try to share wisdom from those people to our listeners, to people that actually want to learn to become a better leader, that are willing to put in the time, because we're putting in the money, right? We're putting this podcast out there for people to listen to. It's a cost to us. So to give people free leadership tactics and wisdom and tips from people that are doing it. And so the reason the name is Leader You is because you are the leader yourself. It's part of being a self-leader is learning, finding resources that can help you get to where you are. So what I wanted to do with you is to talk about some of the tools we use, because we both use TTI Success Insights for helping our clients. It's one of our set of tools. And what I really feel valuable in there is specifically for leadership academies is the common languages that we have, whether it be the DISC, our behaviors, our driving forces, our preferences, our emotional intelligence, and all of those pieces. And then we have 25 leadership competencies that we can assess for. And these assessments are based on your own feelings of where you feel you are right now. This isn't other people's. We can do 360-degree evaluations as well, but this is your own assessment of where you feel you are on those leadership competencies. So as we're going to have a conversation today about the leadership competencies, how it works, why we use it, what it would be important for. And so this is more of an information on what the podcast is actually about. Because I've noticed that there's not been a real clear description I know what leadership competencies are, but I'm not sure that our listeners always know what I'm talking about. Make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
So, how do you use it mostly?
Wow. So this is it's a big thing. I just want to connect, I think, dots on this. And it was interesting. I hadn't thought too much about which one of the 25 competencies, if we were to play this straight, like how you
Mm-hmm.
normally do these interviews. But when you mentioned that, I scanned through the list quickly, and my eye just it really went to one particularly. I was like, oh yeah, yeah, that's a fit. And one of the competencies, and it's in one of my top five, is conceptual thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So it just seems to be the way I'm wired. I like to make connections and see the big concept. What's the big idea within things, and then how do we take complex ideas and break them down, or explain and make them accessible and usable, practical, for other people. So in a sense, this is an applied session where I
Mm-hmm.
can actually use my conceptual thinking and maybe help some of the listeners, viewers, um, think through the competencies and, go meta. So a level above so that we can see, oh, okay, I'm in the driver's seat. It's leader you. This is about my self awareness. I want to understand competencies better, but I want to understand leadership. I want to understand emotional
Mm-hmm.
intelligence. Give me some handles for this. And so that's really what I'd like to use our time for today. That's how I can be of service, I believe.
I believe so too, and I believe we could do another one in the future on conceptual thinking. I have the perfect guess. So, if you're up for
Be
that.
happy to come back if it'd be helpful.
Yeah. So, so when you are working with organizations, and it sounds like you've done a lot of work globally. I know you did a lot of work in Shanghai, and
Yeah.
um, and um, when you're working with people, what are you thinking as it relates to leader? What do they ask you as it relates to leadership competencies, and how could this assessment help someone to develop those?
The question about leadership competencies, I think, is a great one. It often people in HR, human resources, learning and development, are more dialed in to competencies and ask those sort of questions rather than the line leaders or executives in organizations. There are exceptions, and to me, it's a personal, delight to work with those leaders who are like, I want to get into the measurables. I don't want to just sponsor a bunch of training or development activities for people and just pray that, everything turns out well.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure we're doing the right thing and it's targeted. It makes me think about one of those executives I had a privilege to work with about it's quite a few years ago now, but he was in a very responsible position at a global 100 type company, and he was responsible for developing a large sales force. I'm talking about several thousand people in a sales force and different levels within that. And the question was, how do we make sure we have the right skills and the targeted development for different people who are at different, levels in the organization, levels of responsibility, but also different places in their own career and
Mm-hmm.
personal development. And the answer is competencies. It's like the traditional way, and this is how most companies have hired for a long, long time, is they look for, what does the job, what does it require on an activity level? And then, okay, who are we looking for? And they look for background and experience or education and those sort of things. Companies today, and there's a lot of challenges in the market, but the ones that I think are getting it and are ahead of the curve are saying, we've got to hire for skills. We've got to hire for people who can do it
Mm-hmm.
or who are capable of being trained to do things that no one knows how to do. I mean, today, if you're asking for someone who's got 5 years of experience in artificial intelligence, right? It's like, wait a minute, that's a very, very small pool of
Mm-hmm.
people,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 100 people who can really know artificial intelligence from the inside. So you're asking for 5 years experience, which is a kind of a typical
Mm-hmm.
requirement. It's just not going to happen. But if we can find someone who can be hired and trained, who's got the capability to pick it up quickly and synthesize, that's what we're looking for.
Mhm.
And so the answer is competencies.
Mhm.
What does a person already bring to the table? And do they have like one of those meta competencies, like they're trainable, they have the right spirit, the right attitude, they're able to learn things quickly. And
Mhm.
so my kind of short version,
I love it.
long-winded, but a short version of
Mm.
your of answering your question.
No, I love that, and I agree 100%. And I see it as a way for them to see what the actual job calls for too, and
Yeah,
say, let's say they have a skill that may not be that's required for the job, but they're not very well developed in it. This is a way that we can coach and develop them to get that, to build that skill up to where they're feeling successful and they're not stressed in the role because they're not very good at, let's say, decision making. Maybe they're an executive and decision making is one of their lowest competencies that they scored themselves lowest in.
yeah,
Um, then how do we bring that skill up? Because we can go with our strengths for so long, but sometimes
right.
the actual skill is needed for the job, right? We need to
That's
have
right.
some of the skills for the jobs. And, maybe it's customer appreciation is something that's low. And, you have a customer focused business. Well, that's something that we can't just work with your strengths. We need to work with the something that you need to build a skill that, I'm all for going with strengths, but also there's a time to build.
Definitely. Yeah, and the example I was giving, some people listening may think, "Oh, okay, competencies, then this is a big company sort of luxury, that you can take on." Actually, it's not. I'm thinking about like just a couple hundred employee firm that we worked with. This one was in Shanghai actually, and they were in the construction and project management
Hmm.
industry. So you've got architects, you've got on-site project managers, people managing contracts and all this sort of thing. And so people who can do their job well on a technical level, you know, we we've got skills that people would assess for that. But then there's like the leadership and the soft, we call them soft skills, right? Personal skills and interpersonal skills and being able to negotiate, being able to hold your own, with very difficult sort of client situations or customers who are very demanding. We need our frontline project managers to be able to, step up and do that job too.
Hmm.
So we actually asked what these jobs needed at different levels, and then we did the benchmarking process. We call it benchmarking. HR people listening and may say, wait a minute, benchmarking, isn't that what we do when we are looking for salary levels? Yes, that's salary benchmarking, but you can also do skill benchmarking
Hmm.
and ask what sort of competencies are needed to do this job well, and prioritize those top 3 to 5 competencies for a job ideally. And then you can assess people like you were mentioning on the individual level, so that they are able to speak for what their strengths are, what they're competent, and what their areas of growth are too.
Hmm.
And then we can match those up.
Hmm.
What does the job require, and what do people bring to the job, and where do we need to develop them further or leverage strengths that are already in place?
Absolutely. Oftentimes, this is what I see. I don't know if you see this across organizations, but people are good at their job and then they're promoted and now they're in charge of people, but then not given any additional training to lead people and to understand people. And like you said, these interpersonal skills, these leadership skills, those are so crucial for the success and for actually retention and engagement of their other employees that are going to report to this person who
Right.
was good at their job, but that doesn't mean that they now have all the skills needed to be in this leadership role. And so we can help bridge that gap, and to help fill find out what they feel like they're good at, what their strengths are, and then find out where they could use some development, and then coach and develop them to get them to be the best leaders so they have better retention, so they have better engagement, so they have people not leaving their bosses, right? We
Yeah.
always hear people leave bosses, they don't leave organizations, and
True.
it,
70 to 80% of the time. I mean,
yeah.
it's the manager that, so you're exactly right. And the whole thing about like competencies and finding what people are already strong at and good at. And oftentimes people want to know, okay, w what are my gaps? What do I need to shore up or improve? And as you and I both know, the return on that kind of work of trying to get better at what I'm not good at, it takes a lot longer, and
Mhm.
often the ROI, the return isn't that great.
Mhm.
You're gonna get much more out of developing people's strengths or what they're already strong at,
Mhm.
and what they are passionate about, what
Mhm.
people want to do, what they want to show up for work for. That's Black River's,
Mhm.
thing is work should fuel the human spirit, and
Mhm.
so you want people who are already fueled. You
Mhm.
don't want to have to always be tanking up, and filling people
Right.
up every day
Yeah.
because they're in a junk job. They're in a job that they don't want to be doing in the first place, but
Yeah.
they've been promoted to a position. They've been placed in a role where it's like, well, that is the way up.
Mhm.
And people say, an architect, I just want to design buildings. I don't want to manage people.
Mhm.
And it's a challenge. You mentioned that about leading because I think that's an important point. Not a lot of people I find, think in these terms, the leadership pipeline about different levels of leadership. Leadership starts leading myself. That's the premise for Leader U. And then as you move into more responsibility, you lead other people. That's a frontline leader. And then you reach a point where you're leading other leaders.
Mhm.
And as you move to those responsibilities, in an organization, it becomes more complex. And in one sense, a leader at those higher levels is out of touch with some of the day-to-day realities in the organization. So they have to fight really hard to stay in touch with the culture, stay in touch with those concerns of their, individual contributors and frontline people, because that's
Mhm.
where the culture, lives every day.
Mhm.
But at the same time, they have to manage the complexity of the organization. They're leading other leaders who are responsible for leading teams. And
Mhm.
so I think that's where competencies come in as they really help us think in these, different dimensions.
Yeah. So let's just talk about, uh, give us an example of how you've used it in an organization.
Okay. Um, you know, Besides what I was mentioning about the project management team and organization who was trying to prioritize development for their, construction and site managers, um, I've had this also. It's often a case where people in positions of sales leadership or sales management, you know, sales is the front line where, results are actually produced and where um, things become very clear whether the company is working or not working, right? But if we've got sales, sales covers a lot of problems. If you
Mhm.
don't have sales, that is the problem.
Yeah.
Everything else kind of pales in significance if you don't have sales. And so the more complex or nuanced challenge is a company that has pretty good sales, but the pipeline is drying up or the market is changing rapidly, and the way we have been selling and the way that the market, needs it today is it leaders at the top who are often thinking in a multi-year dimension, like time frame, they often can see the trends coming. And
Mhm.
so their challenge is how do I time it right and also, resource the organization so that we're prepared for making these transitions, these shifts.
Mhm.
Because when they happen quickly or unexpectedly, that's when we all have to scramble, just like pandemic,
Mhm.
supply chains disrupted and, everyone scrambling, trying to figure out what do we do now?
Mhm.
Now that we're in, recovery mode after the pandemic, more leaders I'm encountering are saying we need to, work on looking ahead and preparing. So right now I'm looking with a company that, they've got a couple hundred people in their sales organization. And the challenge is my leaders of leaders, so that, it's a pretty senior level role. I need to get them out of their office more. I need to get them actually uh, working with their people and coaching them,
Mhm.
not managing spreadsheets, not,
Mhm.
looking at data, but actually dealing with the people involved.
Mhm.
And there's a very mixed bag. Some of those leaders of leaders are okay and decent at that, and others, they avoid it like the plague.
Mhm.
And so one of the things I'm being tasked with right now, and in one example is how do we first of all define the job to be done in clear terms? Because so far it has been kind of explained in terms of managing the numbers, not
Mm-hmm.
managing people.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I both know it's people who deliver the numbers, who make the numbers happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so you really can't manage from arm's length, and keep your people away
Engaged.
without the culture suffering.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm glad that you brought that up. I was just thinking of a client that reached out that we will be working with here in the future, and he came to us. He's not from the area. He actually moved here a few years ago, and he said, "Hey, I recognize that the team that I'm working with is not as skilled as I would like them to be. My board's not as skilled as I would like them to be. We need to be the ones who have these leadership skills. Our board needs to be the one that everybody wants to model their board after. But I don't have that level of talent right now, and I need to bring them up because I can't recruit and pay the high top dollar, but what I can do is I can develop these people, and
Yeah.
and he's thinking about the future, and he's thinking about building the leadership team. He's thinking about building his people up. He's thinking about, he might need to get rid of a couple, recruit some, but this development is part of his. Well, he's a natural leader, and he knows what he needs to do to get the team that he needs and to have the board that he wants. And so
Yes.
this is going to be a tool that we can use. We can use a lot of different ones, but I think this one will be really huge. And in thinking about boards, have you used the leadership competencies for board of directors positions and things like that?
I've had boards overseeing and wanting this used for the people, that are in the organization in day-to-day
Mm-hmm.
management. I've not had personal experience working with the board where they wanted to do this for board positions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I certainly see a lot of opportunity for that.
Yes.
I think you have some experience here, though, haven't you? You've worked with boards on this.
Yeah. Not as much as I'd like. It's kind of interesting. You sometimes you work with boards that think they have it all figured out, and
Yeah.
sometimes you work with ones that are really looking for opportunities to grow and develop their board. So if I have the right client that is really open-minded as it relates to board development, and their board sees that and values that, I absolutely bring it up. But sometimes, they just, if it's not of interest and I can tell it's not of interest, then it's not a solution that I offer up. But I really see it as an area to develop your leaders. And let's just face it, when we come onto a board, it doesn't mean we're skilled or competent in all the areas. And there's things that
Right.
we could learn and grow to make the board work more effectively, right? And whether it's a board, whether it's an organization, whether it's just an individual contributor, just a person who wants to develop could take this assessment and be like, look, these are my strengths. How can I leverage those? This competency in my job is something my job requires, and I'm not. It's one of my lower ones. So who could I get around? Who could I get to mentor me that's good at that? What are some exercises I could do to develop, let's say, appreciating others?
Mhm.
Whatever the competency is that's low that you're
Mhm.
like, I need to bring that one up. So
Yeah.
for me, what I think this tool is really is a self-awareness tool, just like
Yeah.
many of the other ones that we use, is to
Yes.
actually kind of give you a feedback mechanism to let you know where you are, because we get so confused in our brain, but when you get the assessment, it puts it all in writing and in a language, and then it's like, oh yeah, that does make sense, but we don't know how to put it all into language. And the report is super helpful because it asks you
Yes.
the same questions different ways and all these things, and then
Yep.
it spits it out. And then you're like, finally, a language for me to articulate it to somebody, or to find out what is good and what needs work. And that to me is feedback, just like getting on the scale. Like when I get on the scale, I might not like what I see, but like
Mm.
it's still feedback, and it gives me choices then. What do I want to do? Do I want to stay here? Do I want to make this look better? What can I improve upon? And so I think it's a great tool for self-awareness and that's the first step before you can do anything to
Yes.
regulate anything.
I would agree. And self-awareness, we often think of it as, okay, how do I get self-awareness? I run into this quite often with leaders. And this is my own struggle too that I've encountered early on. I thought self-awareness was Ron looking inward and pulling these insights out of myself, which is, I think it fits into a kind of an American trope, if you will, or a
Mhm.
cliche about we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps.
Mhm.
But when you stop and think about it, that's kind of an impossibility. How do you pull yourself up? And the I think the trick about self-awareness that a lot of people are not aware of, and not punning anything here, is a lot of self-awareness is learning our blind spots and leveraging other people's insights
Mhm.
into us so that we can kind of see what's behind our head. We don't have
Mhm.
eyes in the back of our head, but we've got people 360, all around us, and people at different levels. I find really smart leaders are humble.
Mhm.
They accept input from a lot of people. They don't always agree with it, but they will receive it and consider it. From the most junior person who, in the most offhanded way, might make a comment, maybe even, frankly, whenever they don't know the leader is listening in or is
Mhm.
around. But it's like, oh, that's what people think of me.
Mhm.
And you get a lot of self-awareness from paying attention to feedback. And as you mentioned, the reports are really helpful there. One of the things I would say about that is it really helps to have a skillful guide, a coach, if you
Mhm.
will, who knows the reports well and can help take, because we can generate a lot of insights, a
Mhm.
lot of stuff that you can work on over 6 months or a year, but to just distill it down to what are the one or two things that I really need to focus on,
Mhm.
because we have a whole hierarchy, of competencies or things you may be developed, well developed,
Mhm.
and you may need to pick just one of those to take, you just 10% better would make a huge difference in the organization.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued by this work, lately, that it's not a new book, but Liz Wiseman, she wrote the book Multipliers,
Mhm.
talked about how leaders, can be a multiplier where they actually multiply the wisdom and the intelligence of people around them,
Mhm.
or they can be a diminisher.
Mhm.
They can be an expert and really brilliant person in their own right, but when people are around them, it actually diminishes the IQ, the energy, the engagement of people around them. And of course, we all want to be multipliers. We all want to think that we're a multiplier. Liz's insight, in her book, I think it's really a good one, is we can all be multipliers at some times and diminishers at other times, and awareness or mindset is the difference.
Mhm.
Learning, like, well, you may be a great multiplier, especially when it's in areas like, industry knowledge and competency, and you leverage talent there. But when it comes to people skills, you may be a real diminisher and you
Mhm.
don't even realize that you're shooting yourself in the foot, or that people see you as being gruff, unapproachable, you put people down, and it's like, that wasn't my intention at all.
Mhm.
Okay, but you've got to learn that's how it's coming across, and you're actually diminishing people's, ability to do their job well.
Oh, I love that. I'm gonna have to read that book. It
Yeah.
kind of reminds me of like Adam Grant's work where he talks of give and take. People
Yeah.
are givers or takers or matchers, and
Yes.
he has the quiz. And so, like little things like this to find out if am I a giver, am I a matcher, am I a taker, or a self-compassion quiz, am I compassionate to myself, or do I beat myself up? Like getting to know who you really are, and are you living by your own script? Are you living by someone else's script? And what do you
Right.
want for your life? And all of the things that we coach and when you're coaching people, these are the kind of meaningful conversations that you're having on, what is working well, what's not working, what are some of the things that if we change just this one thing, where would you see the most ROI or return on investment for your time and
Hmm.
your energy? And you're right, having a skillful person to walk you through that's not emotionally attached to it,
Hmm.
to the outcome. I mean, just that they're focused on your success and they can see your blind spots. And will also call you out. And that's the tougher part about being the coach too. Sometimes for me is when I have to tell them like how it is. But that's something that I really feel like that's probably one of my gifts is that I do that. And when that happens, I feel like they really know that they are cared for because that feedback is because of care and concern for them to do better.
Right.
It's not negative feedback. It is constructive feedback, meaning for them to really think on. And they don't have to agree with it, but they need to be willing and open to think about it and marinate on it a little bit more and find out and ask themselves a little bit more about, is this something that I'm doing? Am I seeing a theme here? Have other people said this to me? Because in their reports, oftentimes some people will say, well, this isn't me. And I'm like, okay, well, if that's not you, that's fine. But your homework is to go ask 2 or 3 people that that you work with and that you live with if they see this. And ask for honest feedback that you're trying to grow, you're trying to learn more about yourself. And if you have 2 or 3 people that say, yes, in fact it is, and they can give you examples, it's probably true.
Yeah.
If you find 2 or 3 people that say, no, that's not you, I can't even think of an example of that, and 2 or 3 people say no, then disregard it. But it's an opportunity.
I always warn them, though, don't just pick your good buddies.
No.
Don't just pick the ones, right? Pick that person that comes to mind. You say, oh, I'd never ask them. Yeah, you need to be asking them.
You do need to be asked them.
Because the reality is, you've seen this too. Leaders, they get a lot of complaints.
Mm-hmm.
They get a lot of criticism.
Mm-hmm.
And to be a leader, you've got to have a thick skin. You've got to kind of have armor to protect yourself from all of that stuff that comes at you every day. So that's a defense, mechanism. I understand it. It has to be there. And so leaders sometimes have that tendency to just discount most of the stuff that comes. And so the gems that they need to hear is like, it's got to be delivered in the right way, sometimes by the right person, at the right time and all that. And so the counter of that is that leaders can often be clueless or, deceived, right? Self-deceived, but it's like they don't get the input and the feedback that they need from people who are in a good position to say, hey, wait a minute. You know what? You need to stop and look at this. You can't ignore this. This is something that is real and you got to deal with it. And I think that's where a good coach or a consultant, can come in. They're not politically invested. And, if they really are for the leader, for their best interests, they can often deliver some tough feedback or some, real insight for them. But that is the challenge, is like you're dealing with this stuff every day that you've got to kind of armor yourself against, but you don't want to be so sealed off that you're clueless or oblivious to the reality around you.
Well, and that brings up the research that people with the higher you go in your position, oftentimes the lower your emotional intelligence becomes.
Right. Yeah.
And
that's true.
I see that, and then I see the leaders saying, my frontline workers need emotional intelligence training. I'm like, and I want to say, as do you, because because they think that about you too. Just so that you're clear.
And not just think it, it's true for all of us.
It's true for
We
all of us.
all need to up our game in emotional intelligence.
Yes.
When I come across other consultants, leaders, customers who say, I'm really good, I've got good emotional intelligence, I say, yeah, that's what I used to say before I got emotional intelligence. and that sounds pretty smart aleck. I realize my EQ is not off the charts. Angie, the truth is I'm kind of middling. I'm in the middle. And is that because I grade myself hard? Probably that's part of it. But I've also, it's just like, if you go to school, you get a graduate degree or postgraduate degree, it's like you realize, oh, there's so much more that I didn't realize I didn't even know.
Yeah.
So it kind of humbles you.
Right.
And that's the whole point, is the more you learn about emotional intelligence, the more you realize, oh, I've got so much more to learn.
Yeah. And work on.
There's so many times I'm not self-aware.
Yeah. Me too.
I'm not empathetic.
Yeah.
I'm not. I can be as hardened and, it sounds bad. I'd like to think I'm soft-hearted. I'm responsive to people, but I've learned I'm not empathetic at all times,
Mhm.
and I'm not self-aware either. And so
Right.
that's why I really need people to tell me the truth and hold me in check. And,
Mhm.
I need to listen to feedback, especially the stuff I don't like. I grit my teeth and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, take a deep breath. All right, give it to me. Let me hear it.
Mhm. Yeah. My husband will say, "Are you open to some feedback?" And I'll be like, "Not right now."
And that's a great awareness is right now I'm not,
But
and sometimes people want to give it to us because it's like there's an emotion that's high, maybe for
yeah,
them, but it's like, you know what? I would, I actually would benefit from this, but the truth is I can't hear it right
and yeah,
now.
yeah. So
Or
and they'll
the
come
way
back.
you're talking right now, I can't hear it. It's just triggering all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. So being able to come back and say, "All right, now, after I get the stuff done, get the things I'm working on, get in
Yes.
a state of mind where I'm open to feedback, and then I'm like, okay,
Yes.
sit on the couch, be ready to not be defensive, and be ready to say, no matter if I agree or don't, thank you."
Thank you. That's a Marshall Goldsmith that I really appreciate. I mean, I remember meeting Marshall Goldsmith 20 years ago, and one of the best things I got from him was ask for feed forward, which is different
Mm.
from feedback, but it's like, what can I do?
Mm-hmm.
Feedback is about the past, and that can be helpful about what we did, but also we can get feed forward, which is, what would you recommend that I do, in the future? Or
Mm-hmm.
what should I do next time this comes up?
Mm-hmm.
What would you like? How would you like me to communicate with you?
Mm-hmm.
So in our reports, it's like words that work and words that don't, or
Mm-hmm.
things we should do or things we shouldn't do. Well, asking those questions of people is feed forward.
Mm-hmm.
Is like, what should I do? What next time this situation comes up, what would you like
Mm-hmm.
that's, how would you like it different? If
Right.
I've not been doing it right, or, if I've not been doing it well in a way you can hear it, what would work? That's
Yeah.
feed forward. And then Marshall, said, and whenever people give you anything, feedback or feed forward, just say thank you. Don't explain, don't respond, don't do
Rationalize.
anything besides thank
Thank
you.
you. Exactly. If there's one tip from this might be the name of the podcast. Thank you.
Okay, leader, thank
Thank you.
you.
Because I know for a fact it's a skill. When getting students ready for the operating room, they would get a lot of feedback from their surgery, like as they were doing things, and we would correct them because, if they break sterile technique or how they pass suture, whatever they're doing, how they pass the scalpel, what they're doing safely, it's a lot of feedback, and they have to start to get to the point where they're used to getting the feedback. And we had to drill this into their head, literally, that nobody wants to hear your excuse, your rationalization, your thoughts, what your thought process is. What you need to do is say thank you and then change what you're doing. And let me tell you, it would take a full year to get them to the point, or not the full year, because we were in the lab for 3 to 4 months, but consistently, when they'd start to say, we'd just interrupt them and be like, say thank you, move,
It
and it,
wasn't a one-off
it's
conversation, like
not a
one
one.
and done.
No, it's not a one and done because we're in habits. We're in habits of making
Yes,
excuses. We're in
right.
habits of making justifications and rationalizations for why we were doing this, which there's
Yes,
times for that, but not in the operating room. There
right.
wasn't time for that. It's no, just do it. You've contaminated yourself. You don't say, well, I don't think I did. You just, oh, can I get a new glove? And you change your glove and you move on. Afterwards, you can ask questions because the case is over. We can say, like, I didn't notice what
Mhm.
happened. We can go down that path. But in that
Yes,
moment, in that time, the time now is just to say okay and thank you. Okay or thank you. What
mhm.
those are the actual things that we want to hear coming. So we had to train that. Say okay. We just interrupt them. Okay, thank you, because it's such a habit that we get into, and
Yes.
I think that it's definitely a skill, and we live in a society where we don't want to be wrong, we don't want to be embarrassed, we want to be perfect all the time, and so when someone offers us feedback or insight, we often just push it away. And it's really a gift that they're giving us, and we're
Yeah.
pushing it aside.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, yeah, very true. I wanted to maybe mention this about within emotional intelligence. You know, I think it's helpful. Again, this is my conceptual thinking, but how to grab and organize these different ideas, because we've talked about self-awareness, we've talked a little bit about empathy, today, and then leadership skills, which is an example of social regulation, being able to, help influence the emotional, tone, quality, health of other people around you
Mm-hmm.
in a positive way,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so, if with your permission, I'd like to put some things up on the screen and kind of walk us through a couple of ideas here.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you if you could share those.
So on emotional intelligence, you and I are both, we work on this about these 5 different dimensions, and we often kind of work them up as self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, social awareness, social regulation, or we put them in a wheel. I've arranged them in a different way to make it very clear that some parts of emotional intelligence are the inside job. It's about
Mm-hmm.
myself.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the things on the orange hues on the left here. The individual or self sort of dimensions of EQ, self-awareness, self-regulation, my personal motivation. And then there's other things on the social side about social awareness or empathy, social regulation, like I was mentioning, leadership, networking, negotiation, the sort of things where you're trying to influence people in a social setting. These are 5 dimensions, but being able to make this clear distinction between the self and others, you got to lead yourself, and you've got to be able to lead others. Well, as leaders, the fact is we're often very focused on other people and not so much on ourselves. Or we think that we're good, right?
Right.
And I've already handled this. I've already done the homework, and I wouldn't be in this position of responsibility if I hadn't. And that's true, but the job never ends.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want people around you to grow in self-awareness, you have to show them by example
Mm-hmm.
that you're growing in your self-awareness. And it wasn't just something that you grew in the past.
Mm-hmm.
You're still growing today.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to model that. And having leaders accept that and say, you think that people are following you because of your competence. No, people will follow you more because of your authenticity and because you own up at the times that you're not doing it right or
Mm-hmm.
perfect. It makes you more relatable. It makes you more influential in their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And getting leaders to buy in and accept that is a challenge. But I will tell you, the ones who actually accept it and try it come back and say, Ron, it went completely the opposite of what I thought. I thought, in admitting that I was having a trouble here, or a struggle, that it would diminish me in other people's eyes. But in fact, they said, I'm so glad you said that. Oh, I really,
Mm-hmm.
you seem to have it all together, and I didn't think I could even bring this issue to you. But
Right.
when you're relatable, when you're human to them, and you admit in self-awareness, hey, I don't always measure up, I'm working on this too,
Mm-hmm.
they start sharing more with you, and they trust you more.
Well, because you're vulnerable. There's really no trust without vulnerability. That's one of our tenets at Black River, is that vulnerability does not equal weakness. And it's actually a
Yeah.
precursor to trust. And I love everything you just said, because emotional intelligence is an umbrella for all of these leadership competencies. You wouldn't even
Yes.
know if you're good at negotiation if you don't have self-awareness. And
Yeah.
the stats on self-awareness, and I tell this at every single thing I can, of the research done, only 15% of people actually are self-aware when you do a 360-degree survey across all industries and across all levels.
I'm laughing because, Angie, most leaders want to think that they have above average
Oh, yes. They're
self-awareness.
unicorns. They're all unicorns. Right? And so,
Including me. I want to think I'm above average.
I know
But
I'm not.
in,
I
in
know
a
I'm
room of
not.
leaders, 50% have to be average or below. It have to be statistically.
Exactly. And what I know is that the more I know, the more I know I don't know.
Yeah.
And that is the key. I know that I am continuously learning, growing, and this will never end until the moment I take my last breath. I will have the ability to improve my communication skills, the ability to improve my emotional intelligence skills, and my competencies and the things that matter to me most. It never ends. You've never arrived. And just when you think you have, there's going to be some change where your skills aren't very relevant anymore. And now you need new skills that you need to start to hone in on.
I'm laughing because that wisdom you just shared is at least 2,500 years old. And the person I'm thinking of is Socrates,
Yes.
who said, the reason I'm wise or smart is because I know I
What I
don't
know.
know. Because I know I'm not the smartest person around. And that's the only thing that makes me smart. And he loved to play and make fun of the pompous, self-important people in Athens and
Mm,
Greece of his day, because they didn't seem to be aware that they didn't know it all. And yet they
right.
acted like they did.
Yeah,
And
and they
so,
know
so
internally they don't. They just don't want anybody else to know that. But
that's
it's
true.
like everybody can see it. I don't know who you're hiding it from, but
Right, right. The rest of us
no,
know.
we all know. The deal
We just
is,
choose to overlook it.
yeah, we just know that that's whatever that is. So I love that. Do you have a minute to show the competency, which 25 that we have, so that
Sure.
the listeners, and I know that some of you are listening and not watching, but if you want a copy of the definitions or you want to see a sample assessment, that's something we can always send over so that you can see what that looks like. And then what I do is try to find leaders that are really high in those areas and then bring them on the podcast so that they can share their wisdom, they can share how they learned the hard way, sometimes how their ego got in the way, and what they learned from that, and how it changed their life as they started to hone in on those skills. Because
That's a great reminder,
yeah.
by the way, Angie, about, on a podcast, people are listening. So I showed a visual, but then, just in case I ran through that too fast, it's like a couple dimensions of EQ. Awareness is one thing, and being able to do something with it or, control or regulate it. So awareness and control or regulation are the two sort of domains. And then it applies to self-control, self-awareness, and others.
Mm-hmm.
Awareness of others or empathy, and control or regulation of others, that's leadership or
Mm-hmm.
influence.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got 25 competencies. We call it the DNA. This is the system, the DNA of competencies. And 25 is a lot to kind of keep straight. And so I'm always looking for these schemes or, schemas, how to organize it. And so I can't take full credit for this. I think Ron Price actually tuned me in to look for these things in the different, areas. But out of 25, it almost breaks down in half, where there's about 13 of these competencies that apply to the self or
Mm-hmm.
the individual side of things, and I've organized them in this way. I won't go through the whole list, but I'll just mention, self includes things like thinking skills, conceptual thinking, or futuristic thinking, or continuous learning, things that use our
Mm-hmm.
cognitive abilities. And then we've got self leadership. And this kind of gets more into the self control side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Can you demonstrate flexibility or personal accountability, goal orientation, resiliency, those sort of things. So there's 13 competencies that line up on the self side,
Mm-hmm.
just like in EQ, we've got self-awareness and self-control. And then there's another 12 on the social side, the interpersonal skills.
Mm-hmm.
And we could further probably break these down. Like there's a few of these that are more about social awareness or empathy, like appreciating others, understanding others.
Mm-hmm.
I think customer focus is mostly about empathy
Mm-hmm.
and how well we are connected and understanding our customers? And do we even get into, walking a mile in their shoes and understanding what the world looks like through the customer's eyes? That's a great,
Mm-hmm.
exercise in empathy.
Yeah. I love this example, and Ron Price was one of my mentors, and I did go through the Complete Leader program, and this looks very familiar, and I love this. I love how you've put it, self and others, and I think that is something that I'm going to start adding a little bit more into my emotional intelligence course, because they're interwoven. Even though these are competencies, they're competencies that will enhance your emotional intelligence. And if you're
Yes,
growing your emotional intelligence, it's going to enhance your competencies. They work together.
definitely. There's a lot of, different ways we could connect this, but I just find, it's like I will often even ask a leader, if we're trying to focus, narrow down to the things that are going to make the difference, almost always, and this goes back to people like Stephen Covey, who
Mm-hmm.
says there's, private victory before public victory. Well, pick something on the self side to work on, a competency that either you're already good at, but taking it the next level up would, make you more of a multiplier,
Mm-hmm.
or pick something that is really, it's like, it is thing of immediate concern and you need to shore it up because it's job critical. You know, one example might be a CEO that is really low on resiliency and is just really needs to work on that because everyone is looking to them and they set the emotional temperature
Mm-hmm.
of the organization. So I say pick something on the self side, but also pick something on the social side, that a competency that you can work on that will help you start making even more of a difference with the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be, as you are aware, it's something as simple as, like, for leaders, get out from your protected spot. Now, leaders protect their time. I understand all that. We set up all these
Mm-hmm.
systems, but it's like you need to have times when you actually go undercover boss, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you actually go to the front line and you get your hands dirty, so to speak, in the organization and find out what's really going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of, there's creative ways to do that. And it can be very fun. And often for leaders, it reconnects them back to where they started in their journey.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, I'd forgotten what even, got me here, or why I was so thrilled and excited in the first place. And
Absolutely.
so getting out and connecting with people is one of the things that I encourage leaders to do.
I love this tips, and I think those were some really good tips to end on, because you're talking about pick one thing from the self side, pick one thing from the other side.
Social,
Yeah,
right?
and like I said, if you want a copy of those, I can send you one. You can email me at angie@blackriverpm.com. You can check out Ron's site at leadskill.com. We collaborate well together. We are interested in each other's success and how we can learn from one another, and we're opposite on our disc, so we actually complement. We actually complement each other really well, because I'm a high I and he's a high C. So you can see I'm big on influence and he's big on the conceptual thinking, and it's kind of like me being married to a high C. It's super perfect when I have somebody that sees the world through a different lens than me. And that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast today too, is because I know there's gaps that I don't feel for all my listeners, and bringing somebody like you on to help fill those gaps and share your experience. It also validates the work that we're both doing together is meaningful work, and it's helping people in their organizations. It's helping them in their personal lives. It's helping them to just experience life in a better way, and to their potential.
Yes. Your words are so gracious, and I really appreciate you, Angie. Thanks for having me on. What you brought up in the moment it made me recall just in an instant, like, wow, who is one of the most revered, esteemed leaders that Americans have? If you look back in history, Abraham Lincoln stands out. And Doris Kearns wrote the book Team of Rivals about how Abraham Lincoln is renowned for his leadership, but what made him so effective? Because he surrounded himself with really effective people,
Mm-hmm.
big egos,
Mm-hmm.
people who didn't think that he deserved the job, who thought they were much better. And yet he stacked his cabinet and people around him with, you know, folks who could do their job really well.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't threatened by them. To me, that's the sign of a leader. And that brings us back to kind of the whole idea of, a multiplier is someone who is not just about trying to, project their own competence or doesn't listen to input or feedback except to those one or two people that they think deserve, to be
Mm-hmm.
heard, and or ignore all the inputs of everyone else in the organization. No, the multipliers try to tap into and are concerned about, how do I have people around me show up as smart
Mm-hmm.
and effective and intelligent, and how do I surround myself with a team of rivals, people, how to hire people smarter than me, better than me, more effective at their jobs. And you know what, that makes the leader look better, and they actually do their job better when they're doing that. And so, like, a board should be hiring people that are, bring in talent that are
Mm-hmm.
smarter than them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love it. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. I could just keep talking
We
about
could
this.
go on, couldn't we?
We might need to do conceptual thinking. We'll put that on the agenda moving forward.
All right.
So thank you
Thanks so
so much. I appreciate your time. Did you know that Black River offers a learning management system with over 10,000 development topics? The Leader U Learning Management System is an affordable option that empowers organizations to manage and curate in-house learning development opportunities. The built-in calendar and scheduling system can be used to coordinate compliance courses such as HR Respectful Workplace and IT Cybersecurity, or lunch and learns on topics such as motivation, self-leadership, and leading more effective meetings. At Black River, we are dedicated to providing a learning solution that focuses on engaging employees in their own self and team development. Our clients use the Leader U Learning Management System to remove barriers through accessible and self-paced micro-learning content, save time with the centralized and automated training assignments, promote more meaningful team discussions, issue certificates of completion and track development efforts, and enhance and simplify onboarding efforts. Contact us for more information on our learning management system at info@blackriverpm.com.